English by the Nature Method, Chapter 60, the 60th chapter, A Happy End. "What's on your mind, Mother?" Marian asked her mother. "You have been looking for some time as if you wanted to say something." It was just after lunch on a quiet Sunday afternoon shortly after New Year's Day, and the Edwardses and Storm were gathered in front of the fire. "You see," Mrs. Edwards replied, "Mildred rang up this morning and asked if we couldn't take Elizabeth off her hands this afternoon. Elizabeth is my sister's 12-year-old daughter," she explained to Storm. "Father wasn't here when she rang up, and I didn't know whether he had any plans for this afternoon, so I promised to tell her after lunch." "Well, have you made up your mind about it?" Marian asked. "No, I haven't. I really ought to let her come, I suppose, since we have nothing else on. But I am feeling somewhat tired and was looking forward to a nice peaceful Sunday." She pointed to the small table beside her chair. "You see, I have already gathered together on the table the papers and books that I haven't had time to read till now, and needles and thread, and my scissors for a bit of sewing." "Those are needle and thread. Those are scissors." "But with a child of 12 in the house there would be no peace for doing all that. When she was younger I could give her a pair of scissors and let her cut paper dolls, but she is too old for that now, and she is no good with a needle and thread, so I dare not let her help me. I can't make up my mind what to say to Mildred. If I say no, Mildred will have to change her plans. If I say yes, I'll get no rest today. Marian and I might take her somewhere," Storm suggested, "to the zoo, for instance. That certainly would be nice for us, if you think you can stand it." "I'll ring up Mildred then, and tell her." "You would think we were talking about a dangerous animal and not a girl of 12 to hear your mother speak," he said to Marian. "She's almost as dangerous to have about as a wild beast," Marian answered. "She says and does whatever comes into her mind without thinking first, and she doesn't walk like normal human beings, but moves about by jumping like a monkey. The last time she was here, she tore a big hole in a curtain and broke a very fine dish, a gift to my mother from her uncle in India." "The zoo seems to be the right place for her, then." Storm laughed. "I can almost guess what she is like. My own sister was the same at that age. One of her greatest delights was to sit on a branch above the garden gate and throw things at me when I came home from work. Once she threw a paper bag full of flour down on me. She didn't do that again, though." "I can guess what you did to her, and I can fancy what you must have looked like," Marian said, and smiled at the thought. "The little beast wouldn't come down, of course," Storm went on, "when she saw how angry I was, so I had to go up myself and fetch her down. It was a delight to seize her by the neck and pull her down, I can tell you. If my mother hadn't come out in time to save her, it's quite probable that I should have given her a good beating. As it was, she was quick to seize the chance of getting away from me." "Did you really beat a woman?" Marian interrupted. "Woman!" Storm cried. "Didn't you tell me yourself a moment ago that girls at that age can hardly be regarded as human beings, but are much more like wild animals? All right, it was only in fun. I've always wondered what my mother said to my sister that day to break the proud fighting spirit of the little savage," Storm said, as they were on their way to Marian's aunt, for next day she brought me gifts as a sign that peace had been established once more, and that the spirit of sisterly love was going to govern all her acts from that time on. A cigar and a green and red tie. She probably made her see that even brothers are a sort of human beings, Marian replied. At the house of Marian's aunt, they found Elizabeth jumping about with joy at the thought of going to the zoo with Storm and Marian. "It's no secret," Marian's aunt told her, "that Elizabeth gets no more fun out of her visits to your parents' house than your mother does, so you can fancy her joy when she heard where she is going. It's not far from tears to smiles at that age. Please fetch Elizabeth's woolen cap with the feather," she said to a servant who had just entered the room. "This is the feather, and that's the tear." I want to show you Marion the cap she has been sewing at school this winter. I really think she is becoming somewhat better at needlework now. I didn't know she was making it. She had kept it a great secret. Here it is. Nice, isn't it? She asked when the maid had brought it. She has made all of it herself except the feather, which she pulled from the tail of our neighbor's Christmas turkey, to my husband's great delight. He doesn't like our neighbor, she explained. While Elizabeth was putting on the cap, well, have a good time. We shan't expect you back till 5:30. I'm certainly glad you're taking her. You see, both our servants have the afternoon off today, and we wanted to visit some people where we couldn't very well take Elizabeth. Be good now, Elizabeth. I will, Mamma. Goodbye. At the zoo, most of the animals were not in the open air, but had gone inside, as it was rather cold. They entered one of the buildings, and as they stopped in front of a very large lion, Storm threw out his arm towards it, bowed low, and said to the two girls, "His Majesty the Lion, King of all animals." Elizabeth laughed with delight at this idea, but Marion said, "His Majesty doesn't look as he is enjoying life very much. In fact, he looks so sad to be locked up in here that I almost fancy I can see tears in his eyes." "Why, animals can't cry, can they?" Elizabeth asked Storm. "No, of course not," he answered seriously. "His Majesty has a cold, so his eyes and his nose are running, I think." "Oh, you're just making fun of me," the child cried. "Look at the sharp claws he has," Marion said. "These are claws. He could tear a man to pieces in no time with those claws. You'll be able to watch him use his claws and his teeth as well," Storm told her, and pointed to a man who had entered the house carrying a big basket of food for the animals. The lion got a large bone with lots of meat on it, and at once seized it with his claws and began to tear the meat from the bone with his teeth. That's a bone. In 5 minutes he had finished it, meat, bone and all. Then the big beast rolled peacefully over on one side and lay looking out at the 4 human beings who were watching him. Don't you think he misses the company of the other beasts in the forests of Africa, or wherever he comes from? Marion asked the man. "Not he. He wouldn't know what to do with himself if he was sent to Africa. He's too used to getting his meals every day without having to hunt, and he loves to be with human beings. He's never so happy as when the zoo is full of people for him to look at. When nobody is here, I have to go in and talk to him sometimes to keep him happy. No, it isn't probable that he was ever outside Europe. I think he was born in Berlin." The next place they entered was the monkey house. Elizabeth had brought a bag of nuts and oranges for them. Those are nuts, and those are oranges. And one by one, she rolled or threw the fruit and nuts into them. "Try and make them come up to the fence and fetch the nuts themselves," Marion said. "But be careful that they don't bite your fingers. You had better put the nuts on the floor just outside the fence." "There is a big one coming up now. Let him have an orange," Storm said, pointing to a large monkey with a wise expression on his face. "He looks almost human." "Yes, he looks just like a teacher we have at school," Elizabeth cried. "Mr. Ambrose Smalljoy. Oh, what fun! I know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm going to make a picture of Ambrose on the wall at school and write 'Ambrose the Almost Human' under it. Won't he be angry?" Storm had to laugh at this, but Marion stopped him with a look. "What an idea!" she said to Elizabeth. "I didn't think he would be angry, but only sad." "You don't know Ambrose," the kind-hearted child replied. "He loves a good fight as well as anybody." "What is that monkey over there doing to the other one's head?" she continued, watching a monkey who had put its head on another one's knees. "It's hunting for insects in its hair," Storm replied. "That's an insect. They are learning one of the rules of living with others. Help your neighbor. If we all did that always, it would be much nicer to live and work. We could learn a thing or two from some of the insects, the bees, for example, who all work from morning till night for the benefit of all. I don't think she's heard a word of what you have been saying," Marion smiled, when he finished, for Elizabeth had been busy feeding the monkeys from her bag. They'll eat almost anything, won't they?" she asked, turning away from the fence at last. "Nuts and oranges and apples and bread, and what they find in each other's hair, and worms." "Worms?" Marion cried. "Yes, I tried giving them some worms I had brought along in the bag for the birds, and they seemed to like them, so I let them have them all," the child answered. "Do you mean to tell me," Marion asked, "I have been carrying a bag full of worms around for more than an hour? Let's get out into the fresh air. The thought of it makes me sick." As soon as they got outside, however, Marion felt somewhat better, and as Elizabeth seemed to have decided not to give them any more shocks, the rest of the afternoon passed quite peacefully. When they had taken Elizabeth home, Storm was in a great hurry to get back to Marion's house. "Why all this hurry?" Marion asked in some surprise. "We are going somewhere together with your parents, and we have to be there at 7 o'clock," he replied, "so there isn't much time left." "Where are we going? Tell me about it." "No, it's a secret. You'll see when we get there." After a quick cup of tea, the four of them left the house, Marion wondering what her father was up to. Mr. Edwards took them to a quiet street of small houses surrounded by gardens. He walked up to one of them and rang the bell, while Mrs. Edwards explained. "This is the house where your father and I lived when we were first married. We saw in the paper the day before yesterday that the people who live here are going to move. The house would be empty from March 1st. So we decided to ask about the price, and if it wasn't too dear now, to take you along and show it to you." "Too dear?" Marion asked. "Do you mean for us?" She turned to Storm. "And you haven't told me anything. Does that mean that?" "It means that we can afford to marry now as soon as you can make up your mind about the date. I got a raise this month, and I went out at once and spent it on the ring for you, just to be on the safe side. I mean, that's the ring. I mean, if you should decide that you wanted to be married tomorrow, there would hardly be any time at the last minute for buying a ring, but now I'm prepared for the worst." Marion laughed at this. "May I see the ring now?" she asked, "and try it on?" At this moment, however, the door was opened by a friendly young man. "My wife is out," he said, "but I can show you the house." There were 2 rooms and kitchen downstairs, and 2 rooms and a bathroom upstairs. Marion hurried from room to room, crying, "Isn't this nice? Isn't that lovely?" at every new thing she discovered. "And to think that I was born in this house! How strange!" "Yes, isn't it?" her mother answered. "But come into the kitchen, dear. I want to see what it looks like now." "It looks almost the same," she continued, looking about her. "The only difference is that it's no longer lit by gas. We have electric light now." To the right was the kitchen range. That's the kitchen range. And just opposite, at the other side of the kitchen, stood a small table with 4 chairs round it and flowers in the center. "We have our meals here," the young man explained. "It's easier for my wife. There is gas for cooking, of course, but in winter we always use the kitchen range. It burns coal and keeps the kitchen warm all day. I light the fire in the morning before my wife gets up, and put the kettle on the fire. So by the time we're dressed, the kitchen is already nice and warm, and the water for our tea is boiling. That's the right spirit," Mrs. Edwards said. "I was never able to make my husband get up first." That's the kettle. Beside the kitchen range was a large gas oven. "I had a gas oven too," Mrs. Edwards said. "I was very proud of it. I remember, for most of my friends had no gas oven, and had to use the oven of the kitchen range. But one Christmas, when I had a big turkey in my gas oven, a sudden wind from the open window blew out the flame. I discovered it a few moments later, and went to light it again, of course. But as soon as I lit the match, a big flame jumped out of the gas oven at me and burned some of my hair. For a long time after, I was afraid to light the gas oven, and used my old oven in the kitchen range, just like all my friends." "But here I am just talking and talking," she interrupted herself, "and we haven't heard yet how the 2 of you like the house." "I think it looks fine," Storm said. "And I think it's perfectly lovely," Marion cried. "Only I can't understand how we can possibly afford it." "It's a cheap house," the young man told her. "Probably because it's rather old, but everything is well kept, so we have never felt that the house was old. and we are only moving because we need more room. We have 2 small children, as you saw upstairs. If you promise to light the fire every winter morning and put the kettle on to boil," Marion said to Storm, as they left the house, "I think it would be lovely to start our married life here. And if we were married in the middle of March, there would be 2 weeks to have the rooms painted and to hang the curtains and everything." "I promise," Storm answered, taking her arm and showing her what little there was to be seen of the garden. "I'm glad you're satisfied. Remember Leith Hill? Of course, it isn't so big as the farm, nor so modern as your parents' house, but it will do for us," Marion said. And arm in arm they walked back, full of plans for the future which had suddenly drawn so near. The end.